Hello, and welcome to another episode of Philosophical Bones. Today, my guest is Keith.
What's up?
Co-host of Nerdy Bones and
True Crime Corner.
and True Crime Corner. And my other guest is Chad, his neighbor.
What's up?
So the question today is question number 9. Is humanity heading in the right or wrong direction? And I'm going to throw that over to Keith first.
So you mean in technology, right?
Just whatever.
Okay,
Are
so
we heading in the right or wrong direction? Just period.
What pops into my mind is like AI, and that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
You know, like because down the line, you're gonna have no personal security, no personal, and nothing's gonna be yours anymore.
There's no privacy anymore.
Yeah, like, and we talked about that on a previous Philosophical Bones.
Mm-hmm.
But I honestly think that's like the progression of where it's gonna go. Like there's basically everybody's mind's gonna just be connected, and that's kind of scary.
So that's humanity.
Yeah.
Like, because we create AI, or humanity's going to go in the wrong direction.
Oh, and then the other direction.
Or we, in a way, we already are because we're trying to.
Right, yeah. And the other way my mind goes with it is like just the way that we're using up resources on the planet. That's pretty scary. You know, like, because what's, Chad, what would be like the projected like amount of resources left?
Oh, well, that depends on which resource you're looking for. There's
food.
Again, that's kind of a.
Well, I think water's the biggest thing.
Water's the
They
big thing.
They say in the future wars will be fought over water.
Well, you also have to recognize the shift of the way that humanity lives over the last 100 years. There's an increasing amount of people living in urban environments packed into a very small space.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that puts pressure on the outlying areas, the rural areas, to produce maximum yield to feed those people that are packed so densely.
Yeah.
And so the only way to create that maximum yield, or at least the formula, not necessarily the only way, but the formula that's been used is, extracting ammonium nitrate and applying that to the soil to grow more crops rather than through natural processes.
You've talked to me about that before.
Yeah, well, there's a lot, and that's one resource relating to food. Water is the other big thing. So in the creation of a lot of other energy needs like gas, we have fracking and things like that, and leads to things like the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, and
Well, that was a reason. That was completely different.
yeah, well. We have similar things.
And by the way, to this day, they still do not have clean water.
They still do not have
7
clean
years
water.
later. I think it's like 7 years later.
But other communities in these fracking areas have had issues where their water was not potable, basically.
Oh yeah, well you see the videos of people actually like getting water out of the tap and them lighting on fire.
So the extraction of resources, whether they be for energy needs or food needs or whatever, endangers other resources. So there has to be a balance, and that's what we've gotten away from, I think, in the last several years, last several decades, is we used to kind of live in a certain level of balance, and things were hard. A lot of people died from really simple shit.
Yeah.
But we lived.
That's a good point.
We lived in balance with the planet. Now we have kind of consciously brought ourselves into a different level where we're extracting and we're able to keep ourselves alive longer, have a denser population. And is that the right direction? That's a hard question to say.
Yeah.
It depends on your perspective.
That's why it's a philosophical
So
question.
it's not necessarily the best way to maintain the planet. If we're thinking of all organisms on the planet, are we heading in the right direction? Probably fucking not.
Yeah. Yeah, we think from a resource standpoint, it's like we're heading in the
and
wrong
we also
direction.
think of our own survivability, which goes back to what Keith brought up about AI and a lot of these other technologies, is, well, if we're gonna run out of resources, we need somewhere else for our consciousness to go that doesn't rely on that resource.
I hadn't thought of that before.
So again, it's kind of depending on the perspective that you're looking at, whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. For everything on planet Earth, it's probably not a good thing.
Right.
It doesn't look good.
Well, they would say the future, honestly, is in the stars.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look good for carbon-based organisms, living organisms on planet Earth in the next millennia. The planet Earth has seen some other dire circumstances where things have gone completely down to zero.
Well, there's been a reset more than once.
Yeah, so that might be the normal fucking pattern, but as far as, like living organisms on planet Earth, things don't look so good.
Yeah.
But if we're thinking of a universal, multi-dimensional type survival or benefit, our transfer of consciousness, I can't say if that's going to be a benefit in any way, or if it's just like sending a recording out into space and it just goes and goes forever, and it's just a recording.
What's your opinion on the transfer of consciousness? Like being downloaded into a computer. Is that you?
It's funny. I actually wrote this down for another philosophical question, but it's good to bring up now.
Yeah, my bad.
No, totally fine. It's yeah.
Like, so do you think that's actually you, or is that just a?
I haven't looked enough into it to really understand what they're doing.
Because it's brainwaves when it really boils down.
It is. Well, it's brainwaves and it's habits and experiences that are what you identify with. And I think the mind is such a fallible agent of recording. Yeah, I mean, it's an organic way of recording your experiences and interpreting and all of that stuff. So it's hard to say whether your soul essence or your consciousness.
I guess that's my question.
Your consciousness could actually really be transferred to something
cyberspace.
Electronic, but the nature of your soul or your identity or your consciousness is so fucking weird anyway. It's hard to put boundaries on whether that can be transferred to something else, whether, when you die, it gets transferred to a new body, or it floats around in the ethers, or
I like that, the ethers.
It's hard to say without going through the experience and documenting it, or having some other way of verifying that, and that's kind of the magic of it. Also, is we don't have any way of verifying what happens after a soul a body expires to the soul, or so that would kind of, an understanding of that would gain more insight into whether a soul could be, or your essence could be transferred electronically in some way.
Yeah. Well, one of the big things, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So it's pretty much, I'm going to kind of break it back a little bit. It's like, it seems like when it comes to, so back to the question of, sorry, I got to look it up. I got to look at it again. Are we heading in the right or wrong direction? I look at, when it comes to resources, we're heading in the wrong direction.
Absolutely.
It seems like we're trying to make up for it now, though, with doing like renewable energy and recycling. Yeah, they say that we're pretty close to being on the brink of like where we can't come back, of like with global warming, for instance. But it seems like on a technology standpoint, we kind of are in a way heading in the right direction. So it's kind of like the scales are kind of like leaning both ways. Like both of them are like not balanced.
Well, I personally think the only real future for the human race, like 4,000, 3,000 years from now, is interstellar space travel. That was a hard word to say. That was a hard word to say.
No, I think you're totally right about that, actually.
That's the only way the human race is going to persevere, is actually leaving the planet, which will be really interesting because there'll be people left behind. There'll be people that leave, or is the entire human race as a collective going to be like, we got this date that we're picking and we're all leaving.
Yeah,
so
it's probably got to happen at some point too, especially the way that just the Earth is heating up so much.
Yeah. Not to mention that what happened to whatever organisms, like Chad said, organisms that would be left behind, like the whales in the ocean, the crickets in the field.
Yeah, we'd almost have to build like a Noah's Ark, pretty much, to try to expand that.
Yeah, so that's an interesting concept.
Yeah. So,
but that's my thought of like that's the only real way that we're gonna persevere. That's the word I want to use.
So, like, other than resource wise, like how else are we heading in the wrong direction? If you say that
heading in the wrong direction, go ahead.
I would say for our own organic and biological survivability, we're kind of heading in the wrong direction. There's advances in medicine and things like that provide for a longer life.
Medicine, that's a good point there.
So that's kind of,
that's one of those things where we're in the right.
That's a progression that at least in the last 100 years, for the most part, we've been heading in the right direction. But the thing is it's been very narrow viewpoint, and some of those medical advances, the symptoms are also the ills. So
antibiotics.
Well, antibiotics. So like antibiotics save lives. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
You know, it's.
But it also creates superbugs.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's how medicine is applied, and so, you know, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how humans, you know, going back 60 years and further, have lived more in balance with the world and nature and their environment. Sometimes that means dying when you're 30 from an infection.
Right. Yeah.
And that controls the population, and so resources sustain the population, and so on and so forth. And of course, it's in our nature to want to sustain the lives of ourselves and our loved ones.
It's in your nature to want to stay alive.
Yeah. Well, and not just that, but to help your neighbor, your family, XYZ survive.
Well, it used to be like a great famine. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
There used to be like a great famine or a great war would wipe out like a major amount of people in the world, and you kind of get back to that. Like,
think of the bubonic plague,
or even like World War II. Like how many people died during that? You know.
Right. And so there's a balance that we have in the past lived with, and there's a lot of tragedy tied into that. So the experience of the average person, because population is lower, is more tragic because they've lost more people, and they've lost babies due to infection, and they've lost a lot. So there's been an elevation in survivability due to medicine, modern medicine, but like Keith was saying, the overuse of antibiotics or the broad application with the intention of everybody wants to keep their loved ones alive has created some of these superbugs that are incredibly hard to deal with.
Like Streptococcus recently.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot, and so those things have the potential of bringing the balance back. You know, that's really what it comes down to. Yeah. It's not that it's going to annihilate everything, but
Mother Nature always tends to check us.
well, as human beings, as organic beings, we are susceptible to everything in
we're pretty darn
nature,
fragile.
And so that kind of goes back to the original question: are we heading in the right or the wrong direction? And it's really depending on what your perspective is. If your perspective is the survivability of the organic human being and the ecosystem in which it lives, probably heading in the wrong direction. If
I would have to agree.
If you're talking about consciousness and the potential to go beyond even the dimension, you know, we can talk about the physical realities of time and space and all of that, but then there's layers of dimension when you start talking about time in relation to space.
Relativity.
Yeah, theory of relativity. So then you start talking about dimensions, and so stuff gets really weird in that part. So
we did an episode a couple weeks ago, I think, on the multiverse.
Oh, that was a good one.
The multiverse
even in quantum theory or quantum physics, which is, it's not completely chartable, but there are some experiments that can be done that are really like mind-boggling.
Like super collider.
Yeah, and showing examples of quantum theory, two things being in the same place at once, or one thing being in two places at once.
Are you talking about superposition?
Well, yeah, I mean, so that's one thing dealing with quantum physics, or quantum theory, because physics is an actual science and quantum theory is still technically a theory.
See, and that stays on line with the original question: is the human race staying on the same line? Or is
we going in the right or wrong direction?
Yeah, you know, so science, I think, is going in the right direction.
Oh yeah, science, I would definitely say, is going in the right direction.
Well, you know, again, it kind of depends on your perspective of what the ideal outcome is. If you're
I have a good question for you when you're done with your thought.
Okay, when your focus is in the survivability of the organic body and its environment, the Earth, this little blue ball that's spinning through space in our galaxy in the Milky Way, if it's all tied into that, then we're not looking so good. But
I like the hand gestures.
if you're looking at a consciousness level, I think our experience is so tied to our organic bodies, we can't fully fathom what's good and what's bad on the
cosmic scale?
on the cosmic scale or on the consciousness scale. And I think that in our physical bodies comes down to emotion, or as the hippies say, vibes. So when we feel certain things, I think that's an energetic indicator. We inexplicably have the hairs raise up on our arms, and there's physical responses to certain things.
It's like being watched.
And I think that is an overlap to the energetics. The energetic level of the universe, not just the Terra Earth. Not just our little organic bubble of, organisms. And so with that energetics, I also kind of feel like we're not doing so great. Like, we don't recognize that as a global populace as much as is historically written about. I feel like people are less in touch with what often led to religions and spiritual experiences that I think touch on the cosmic scale and bring things, again, back into a certain kind of balance when you realize you're just this carbon organism, but within that carbon organism there's a certain energy that is intrinsic, which is the consciousness or the soul or whatever you want to call it. And so the original question is a really difficult question.
I fucking love tangents.
It's very layered.
I love
tangents.
But you had a question you wanted to ask.
Oh, I had this is something I want to kind of like lay on you and kind of I want to get your opinion on it.
All right.
So cloning. So is like in the plant world, the animal world, would you think cloning would be a bad idea because of genetic indiversity?
You want to put us in the right or wrong direction?
Exactly. Like what I'm getting at is genetic indiversity. Basically not being able to fight diseases and stuff like that.
I think
it's like inbreeding.
Kind of like inbreeding. I think on the biological level, cloning for
plants,
for animals in general, and it gets kind of muddy depending on the kingdom, but I feel like that would be a dangerous place to approach, and I don't. That's again.
It's a good question, right?
That is a very good question. I don't think it would be a good thing, really.
Genetic diversity is a big thing that's helped us, like you were talking about, going in the right direction. Genetic diversity is what's made us be able to fight diseases.
Yeah,
it is. But when you're getting to that level of cloning, say, human beings or any mammal, cloning whales, dolphins, whatever, when you're dealing with that level of gene manipulation, you have the ability to remove and insert different genes to deal with
CRISPR.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of labs doing different things. So you have the ability to kind of insert or remove genes for predispositions and increase resistance for things. And so, that's one of those arguable points for a lot of GMOs, and things like that, is like you have the ability to insert or remove these triggering genes.
I think the phrase you're looking for is genetic markers.
Well, yeah, I mean that's one part of it, but the more broad question is, does that lead to superbugs, more or less?
Yeah.
So
again,
does that manipulation lead to a bigger problem than you were dealing with before?
Well, one thing I want to mention is you're pretty much on a base level of like genetic manipulation. We're really talking about like selective breeding in a way. You're getting out those traits you don't want there. Like I look back to dogs, for instance.
Well, that's kind of what you're looking at, but a clone is literally the same as the parent. So once you have a parent that has like the quote unquote perfect genes, if you just clone that, biologically you're going to have the same thing every time.
Well, you see it pop up with like when you get rid of genetic diversity, all of a sudden something will like pop up.
Yeah,
because it was like
that's the thing with the antibiotics and superbugs.
Yeah,
the relation there. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big concern with anytime you narrow the gene pool or narrow the diversity of something. That the narrowing might be zeroing in on something that's really good. It's got a really strong profile, but the bugs are diverse. So it's like you might have a really high wall, but if there's 1 million or 5 million things coming at you, they might find a hole in that wall.
Yeah.
And that speaks towards like if we're moving in the right direction, is antibiotics a good thing? You know, it keeps us alive.
It is, but it's just it's starting. It's just the overuse of it nowadays that's become the problem.
Yeah, you had a thought earlier that I think I cut you off on. What were you saying?
I don't remember.
But so what I really think was really interesting today, we were talking about is humanity going in the right or wrong direction, and we started talking about antibiotics. We started talking about space travel. We had a lot of really
downloading our consciousness.
A lot of really interesting points tonight, but like my big thought takeaway from this is like I feel like we are moving in the right direction as far as our race.
Okay.
But as far as staying on this planet, I don't think so.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point.
Yeah, so I think about like 10,000 years from now, there's going to be stories told about planet Earth.
How we were fucking shit up at this time.
10,000 years from now, I think there's going to be...
Well, it's one of those things with hindsight is like, hindsight's always 20/20. It's like we look back like, even just 50 years, like, things are better now than they were 50 years ago because of numerous reasons, technology, medicine, all that. And of course, we could look 50 years in the future. We can't predict it, but it's like, okay, people will look back on us and be like, no, things suck then.
Well, and Chad brought up a great point of like life expectancy. Well, I don't know why I can't say that word. 100 years ago was a lot shorter.
Oh, yeah.
And that was in a sad way, it's actually better for the planet.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, and it's arguably better for humanity because there's less war, there's less poverty in a way. And so poverty is a weird thing, right? Like it's kind of based on what the baseline whatever part of the world.
Poverty is a really good point for him to pick up on.
Well, whatever part of the world in whatever timeline you live in, poverty looks different, right? So look at South Africa. Well, what was luxury for Europeans in 1700 is poverty for the average American today.
Exactly,
it's true.
Even though they might have had gold and gemstones, they didn't. And they had wheat. They didn't have any papayas. They didn't have any. They didn't have
a flat screen.
But even
TV.
today, 100 years later, whatever, we're still dealing with poverty,
right?
Yeah,
throughout the world.
So poverty looks different. Again, depending on where you are and what timeline you live in. So, what poverty looks like in the United States, in some other countries.
Like a second ago, I mentioned South Africa.
Yeah.
Well, South Africa's actually...
There's a lot of places in South Africa that are shanty towns.
They are, but it's disparity like you see in Mexico, where there's some very rich parts of South Africa, some very European feeling places. It was colonized by Great Britain. So there's a lot of infrastructure there, but there's also a lot of disparity, a lot of difference between the haves and the have-nots. And you see the same thing in Mexico.
You see in the U.S.
Yeah. You see it in
every
US,
country.
Yeah. Some places the gap between the two are just like
huge,
super stark. I mean, they are almost different realities in the same country.
Yeah,
and they are different realities.
Well, economics is a good point to touch on for the evolution of humanity, if like we're going in the right direction or not. I think that's a good thing to talk about.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it's moving very slowly, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well, I would argue the opposite with the advent and prevalence of the internet and internet communications, even in third world countries.
Yeah.
I feel like that has a potential and has exemplified some rise in commerce in a different way that has been over the last 100 years. And again, that kind of goes back to AI and all of those things. Is that good or is that bad? It's different. It's completely different, and it's a giant shift. And so, from the organic being perspective, it's probably bad. It's probably a bad thing. But so the same technologies that have provided the extraction of resources from some of these third world countries, and in Africa or even within our own country and different places, impoverishes some people to give other people the ease and luxury to drive their cars around, to have goods shipped across their continent, fuels and things like that. It impoverishes some and elevates the population of others. It's self-destructive to the organic being of the earth, but it seems to be going in a direction that is inorganic. So I don't know if there was some kind of 2001 Space Odyssey inception that happened, or who knows what's really driving that, or if it's just our own consciousness, again, seeking to help us survive and recognizing that the organic ball that we live on is a finite resource, and so we better figure something out. It might be that's the direction that things are going, is, kind of subconsciously as a species, we've decided like, oh, time is up soon. And so again, is it good? Is it bad? I can't say as a judge.
Yeah.
It depends on your perspective and what you are wanting to perpetuate. And
I think this was a good question for Chad to tackle.
Yeah, this is definitely. I mean, and this is why it's a philosophical question, because you can't. It's not like just a question with a yes or no answer for the most part.
Yeah,
that's why you kind of debate on it, talk about it, try to figure it out.
Yeah,
we try to figure out the best we can. Sometimes we come up with an answer, like what we think it would be is an answer, and sometimes we don't.
We're moving forward. But is it good or is it bad?
Yeah, I think all of us would, or all, us three would say, like, we just don't know if it's heading in the right or wrong direction, because it's a little bit of both. It's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Some places it is, some places it isn't. You got to take the good with the bad.
Well, here's the thing.
Can't be all good.
If our consciousness is bound to our organic form, we are in trouble.
That's a good point. That is a very good point.
We're all in a lot of trouble, no matter how much money we have or how much oil we have or any resource. We're all in big, big trouble if we're bound to our organic forms.
Yeah. No, we gotta have some hope at least. Yeah, we hope, but we just don't know. So it's up to you out there. Yeah. But just, I always feel like just be a good person.
Just be a good person. Don't be a douchebag.
Yeah. Just do what you can to not fuck over like what we got.
Help your fellow man.
Exactly. Just be a good person. But anyway. So this has been Philosophical Bones, question 9.
Thanks for having me on again.
Like I said, you're welcome. Thanks for coming on, Chad.
For sure.
And the question was, is humanity heading in the right or wrong direction? And honestly, we just don't know. So, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. And I'm always looking for guests. You want to hit us up on Facebook, Instagram.
Don't forget that Nick can take over the phone call.
Yeah. Just hit me up with a question, or if you want to come on, I'm always looking for guests. So anyway, this has been Philosophical Bones, and keep thinking.